Moving states to save taxes. This is something I see a fair amount as a practicing business lawyer, or moving even internationally potentially to save taxes. And it has a number of issues with it. So today I kind of want to take a high level overview of what it looks like to potentially move from one place to another to potentially save taxes, right? And it seems very attractive. Some states in the U.S. have much higher tax rates than others. Some countries have very attractive tax rates. But as with many things, the devil's in the details. So today, we're going to kind of give you a high level overview of some of those details. We won't be getting very state specific about this, but I do want to get you kind of an idea of the things you need to be looking at. And obviously, we can't do individual advice. We can't have an attorney-client relationship over, a video session posted on a website, but I can give you some material that will help you understand this better, that whoever you choose to work with in structuring your business, your company, and your life, maybe you can get the help you need because you'll know better the questions to ask, or at least open the ideas up. And that's our goal today, is to give you some education, give you some background, and help you think about this some. A lot of people think it's as easy as exchanging your driver's license and getting new plates on your cars, and then just stop paying tax in a high tax state, right? And it's never that simple, right? There are a lot more factors with this, particularly here in the U.S. And if you're going international, you want to get out of the U.S. tax system. That has a whole lot of items with it, right? So, I'm doing this primarily for Americans that might be thinking about moving within America, or Americans that might be thinking about leaving the U.S. But some of these taxation principles are going to apply, nationally and internationally. But you got to really confirm with a local lawyer what you're looking at, because laws do vary so widely around the world, even within the U.S. There's a lot of variance, so you got to look at it. But some of the U.S. system is set up by the U.S. Constitution, and some of it is set up by just general concepts of international law or tax treaties between these various countries. So many of these principles will look similar as you examine them. A big concept here in the U.S. is domicile and residence. And these are topics you don't see a lot. As I get on the forums and I just see people talking about this stuff, the concept of domicile. And comment below if this is kind of the first time you're hearing about domicile, or if you don't understand the difference between domicile and residence. Let me know, because it's something we can zoom in deeper. As always on this legal channel, please don't put anything confidential in the comments. But if you want to make a general comment, just let me know. If you want more material on something, if that doesn't, expose anything confidential, please feel free to do that. So we have these two concepts in the U.S. of domicile and residence. And the domicile is where you basically are permanently established and intend to return. And if you read the case law here in the U.S., it will say you can have but one domicile. Now, interestingly, there is some case law which says that there can be a disagreement among courts of where you're domiciled. But at the end of the day, you should only have one domicile. You can get in a very weird place if you might get courts in two different states think that your domicile is different based on different tests they apply. But in theory, you should only have one domicile. The domicile is where you basically intend to return. That is your home. And then you have residence. Residence is where you are at, where you're residing. And it does not have to match your domicile. For many people, it does, right? Most people who, have one house, who live somewhere continuously, don't have intentions to return back perhaps to where they came from, will have a matching residence and domicile. But some people don't necessarily have a matching residence and domicile. And in fact, under U.S. system, and this is rarely discussed, but there is case law to this effect, you can actually have more than one residence, right? There are actually people who, under the various tax tests for various states, could be resident in more than one state. And most people, that just, blows their mind. They can't understand how you can be resident in more than one state, but states have different tests. One of the very common tests, or one of the common internet parlance tests, is the 183 days, right? If you're in a state 183 days, then you're a resident, you pay taxes. And many states do have something to that effect. If you live in that state for 183 days, that is triggering residence. But it's usually a and or test where there are more different ways you can become a resident. For instance, New York State has notions about, having access to a place of abode and being physically present in the state. I was just reviewing a case the other day, and they had a gentleman whose parents had a house in New York State. He was in New York State to work, but he actually lived in New Jersey. And in this case, the state of New York argued that he was resident in New York because he was in New York a lot, and he had access to his parents' place where he did occasionally sleep on the couch, right? And so that's a very unusual case, but it shows you that you can trip into residence even if you don't live there. This guy had a place in New Jersey. From what I could tell, he spent most of his time at his house in New Jersey when he wasn't working in New York. His job was in New York, but because he had connections with both states, the state of New York claimed residency, right? And we'll see that. So that can become very tricky. Generally, the taxation is going to be tied to the residency, but it can also be tied to your domicile as well. There's a number of states that say they will tax you if you are a domiciliary in that state, if you have your domicile there. So, for instance, let's say you live in a state and you've established a domicile in state A, and you really intend to go back to state A. Meanwhile, you take a job in state B, and you're living and working in state B. Well, in theory, you could be in state B, required to be paying taxes as a resident of state B. Meanwhile, state A would say that you're domiciled here, we know you're coming back, we also want to cut it to taxes. That interplay can be very tricky, right? And now usually there's going to be offsets, right? So if you're domiciled in state A, working in state B, state A is usually going to give you a credit for taxes paid to state B, so you're not going to pay double tax, but you might end up paying some tax to both states, and you're probably going to pay higher taxes than if you're a resident of just one state in many cases. So people, as they're planning and as they get advanced with their business and their careers, they often want to move. And I saw this in Texas when I was in Texas primarily. I'm primarily in Florida now. I'm still licensed to practice law in Texas, still do a lot in Texas. But we would see people coming in from, like, say, a California to Texas, right? And obviously people that go California, Texas, they often want to cut off paying that California income tax. And so you need to look at these tests very carefully, right? And make sure that they are indeed a resident of Texas. And so there's a lot of factors that go into it. I will not go into all of it today. You can look at it. There's guidance from a lot of state tax authorities, but things like, where's your driver's license? Where's your vehicle registered? Which, again, I mentioned that earlier. A lot of people think that's all they have to do. But, where's your home? Where's your spouse? Where's your children? Where's your church if you have that? Where do you do your banking? You start going through layers of analysis to figure out where you're really closer connected to, right? And that those test your domicile and potentially test your residence as well. So it's a lot more complicated in many states than just this pure 183-day test that you see popping up. Very similar concepts internationally, and you can look at, and my experience of doing this in U.S. state law and looking at this analysis many times, when these issues have come up internationally, you see a lot of parallels and overlaps. Of course, internationally, you bring in different languages, you bring in different customs and traditions, so there's a lot more different tests. Some countries do run a simple 183-day test. If you're president of a country 183 days, then potentially you're a resident of that country. But many countries start getting a layer deeper on that, right? What connection do you have to the country? Have you filed declarations of domicile in other countries? Where do you own real estate? Where do you keep bank accounts, right? It gets very, very deep and complex. So if you think you can just move from one country to another and just start paying tax in the new country, not pay tax in the old country, or leave the old country and not pay tax in the new country, you've got to get very, very detailed in your analysis, right? It becomes very important to work through those details. And a lot of people are surprised. That's why you have to have a comprehensive plan, right? You want to sit down with your U.S. lawyers, your lawyers of the country you might be going to, business people, and think about structures, think about how you trigger these tests and what results you want, and then what constraints the results you want put on you, right? You may need to be physically present in different places. You may have to, consider changing your structure to pass some of these tests, right? Because they really are trying to test to make sure that you're actually connected with, different city, different state, different country, depending on what we're talking about. We're talking about moving states versus moving countries. Meanwhile, the U.S., if you happen to be an American citizen, the U.S. is one of only 2 countries in the world where its citizens enjoy worldwide taxation, meaning that if you are a U.S. citizen, even if you're not in the U.S., you generally have an obligation to file a tax return unless you fall under certain exemptions or categories of low income or don't make money, etc. You're generally going to have to file. And so many U.S. citizens are outside of the U.S. and they're filing dual tax returns, right? There may be a tax treaty between the U.S. and your other country which helps offset that. You'll also potentially have that kind of foreign tax exclusion. We talked about that earlier between the states. It can also apply between countries, right? If you're a U.S. citizen and you go live in country B and you trigger a lot of tax in country B because you live in country B, the U.S. in general will give you an offset against your U.S. taxes, at least to some extent, because you paid taxes to country B. So again, you're not going to pay a full double taxation. You're not going to pay taxes to both systems. They're going to calculate off each other. And a lot of times the result is you pay the higher of the 2 tax rates. U.S. also has what they call the foreign income earned exclusion. So if you happen to be in a situation where you're earning income outside the U.S., i.e. you have a job, you potentially could get some kinds of offsets or exemption there for that income, right? That income will not flow onto your U.S. tax return. Obviously, it will flow onto that foreign tax return. That could be a real benefit if you're working a job, if you're, at or under or near the exclusion amount in the U.S., and if the country you're in happens to have a low tax rate. If the country you're in has a very high tax rate, you're going to end up paying as much to them as you would have paid to the U.S. You don't really get ahead. But if you're in a low tax country, no tax country on earned income, you could end up in a very good situation, right? These are the types of things that you have to get out the paper and talk to your advisors and sketch, right? And then what does this mean for your businesses? Where does the business income flow? What structure do you use for that, right? And that can get very complex very fast. But the reality is there's got to generally be physical, real substance behind the move. You can't just, swap out some driver's licenses, get your mail delivered to a different state, and then stop paying taxes in another state, right? And I've actually had people, think that it was that simple as we've got engaged and started doing an analysis legally of what's required to change a state of residence, let's say in the U.S. Some people think it's simple as, well, I'll just have my mail sent to the new state, get a driver's license, get a license plates on my car, and I'll just stop paying taxes to my old state. It's not going to be that simple, right? With those domicile rules that we talked about, the other residency rules, such as keeping a resident there and being physically present, you're going to probably have to make some life changes. Now, for some people, that's not that difficult. For some people, it's very difficult. That's why you need to get some experienced advice involved. So I hope this opens up some of the reality. Please let me know, again, keeping confidentiality, but if you feel comfortable, if you feel like you can talk about it, let me know if you find any of this surprising. Let me know if you understand that domicile residence thing and if you understand those different countries. If there's ideas or things you want me to talk about in future videos, do let me know. I enjoy the comments when they come in. I like reading them. Sometimes it prompts a future video. So please let me know where you're at and what you're thinking about. It may prompt another video for the channel to help people. If you're enjoying the channel, please consider subscribing. We got a whole library of past videos for you to go check out. Look forward to seeing you all for another video soon. Thanks for tuning in today, folks.